Welcome to episode 349 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to, once again, retired agent Scott Payne, who served in the FBI for nearly 23 years. In this episode, Scott reviews his undercover role in Operation Roadkill, the Boston Division's investigation targeting members and associates of the local Taunton and Brockton, Massachusetts chapters of the Outlaw Motorcycle Club. In this undercover role, Scott Payne became Scott Calloway, a Harley-loving, whiskey-drinking site survey specialist from Texas. His 2-year-long role in the case contributed to the arrest and conviction of numerous individuals on federal drug trafficking and firearms charges. During Scott's career, he was assigned to the New York field office, the San Antonio field office at the McAllen Resident Agency, and the Knoxville field office. As a case agent, Scott's investigations targeted drug trafficking and special interest alien smuggling organizations, gangs, violent crime, criminal enterprises, public corruption, and domestic terrorism. Throughout his FBI career, Scott was the primary undercover agent on numerous long-term undercover operations. These UCOs covered a variety of investigations to include violent motorcycle gangs, public corruption, murder for hire, drug trafficking, and domestic terrorism groups with international ties. Scott was also an FBI SWAT team operator, as well as a firearms and defensive tactics instructor. Scott has also trained thousands of agents and law enforcement officers at undercover certification schools. Since retiring from the FBI, Scott continues to travel and teach at undercover and tactical schools. He's a keynote speaker and is also pursuing a career in the film and TV business. Scott is a brand new author of Codename Pale Horse: How I Went Undercover to Expose America's Nazis. His new true crime book is available wherever books are sold. Now, before we get to the case review, I want to say happy birthday to me. It was March 25th, and the best gift that I got was learning Million Podcast had rated FBI Retired Case File Review the #1 law enforcement podcast. Woohoo! Thanks for listening to this show. I want to welcome new listeners. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com. You'll also find links to where you can buy me a cup of coffee, join my reader team about crime fiction and the FBI and books, TV, and movies, and learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest back again, retired agent Scott Payne. Hey, Scott, how are you?
I'm great, sis. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Finally, the book is coming out.
Yes.
You and I have been talking for, I think it's been a couple of years now, about some of the publication snafus and stuff, but all over and done. The book is going to be out by the time this case review airs, and I've read it. The book is called Codename Pale Horse: How I Went Undercover to Expose America's Nazis.
Yes, ma'am.
So how does it feel?
In the beginning, it was definitely surreal, but it's getting more. We've had this talk before. There's going to be haters, and that used to bother the what out of me because I care so much about the program and the undercover technique. But at the end of the day, I've always been a speaker and an instructor. You can't make everybody happy. I'm doing me. This is what I do. It's been really good. I did not want to do a book. I didn't even want to do an interview for an article when Rolling Stones happened. But now that I've done the process, it was a great process because you got to dive back in and rehash everything. And a lot of it I still teach everywhere, but some of it wasn't easy. You got to dive back into some tough times. And me and my wife have to delve back into when things weren't great and talk about it. It was a really cool process and I'm happy. I'm looking forward to it. I have joked with my wife that I think I need to go undercover again. And she's like, what are you talking about? You retired? And I said, yeah, but I'm running out of stories to tell.
I like that.
I need a couple of more life-threatening situations.
You're getting tired of your own stories.
Yeah.
There are still lots of people that haven't heard your stories. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to have you review another case. Of course, you were on before, episode 289, where we talked about you being a closer for a self-proclaimed white supremacist who was planning a mass shooting at a synagogue, and you were supposed to be providing him the weapon to do that. That episode was so interesting and fascinating, and we got to learn a lot about the mindset of a white supremacist. We got to learn about Undercover. And this one, you would think people listening would think that I'm going to talk to you more about that because domestic terrorism and white supremacy is in the news today. But you and I chatted and agreed that the outlaw case that you did really provides more teachable moments for people who really want to know about the sacrifices agents make every day and the sacrifices made by those going undercover.
Yes, ma'am. I agree. That's one thing on book title. I went back and forth with Simon and Schuster and the big wigs that are smarter than me about the subtitle because originally the subtitle was supposed to be something along the lines of how I became Pale Horse, and that would show that it's a journey. Like I started working undercover at a state and local level in vice and narcotics in South Carolina in 1996. I think I became certified as an FBI undercover around 2002. But just looking at the title, I thought, well, nobody's going to know that there's public corruption cases, there's multiple murder for hire cases, there's going to be crazy things with home invasion stuff, working the border kind of thing, and then the outlaw stuff. There's a lot more than just white supremacy. Yeah, I agree with you. I think when we're getting ready to talk about it was like a 3-year chunk of my life. I made some mistakes and I had to learn.
In one of the earlier chapters, you talk about this outlaw case, Operation Roadkill, and how it was not your first undercover operation once you were officially certified as an undercover agent. You had done some cameos, but this was your biggest undercover role that you played. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I had done some cameos, like you said, for the listeners that don't know. It's basically just like it is in acting. I'm going on to a case. I'm not even considered a secondary undercover because I just pop in for a party or something to help somebody look good. I'm a truck driver. I'm delivering something for somebody and I don't hang out with the targets really. I just come in and go out. But I had been the primary undercover on some other cases. Like really one of the main ones. It's like the one I still can't talk about because it was a classified case. But it is the case that got me transferred. As a new agent, I was assigned to New York City. So it got me transferred from New York City to San Antonio Division. And then once the undercover was over, I ended up going down to McAllen on the border of Mexico. And there were some other things in there. But as far as it working and you getting in deep and bonding and all the crazy stuff, yeah, it was probably one of the biggest ones I've ever done because the Outlaws case lasted 2 years. And I don't think I met 2 years undercover. I mean, I've done a year and a half. It's not like a clock on that. You just go where the case takes you. One of the hardest decisions I've always said as a deep undercover or as the case agent on these long-term cases is when to pull the plug. Because there's always that, hey man, if we do another 30 days of this wiretap, or if we go and talk to this one more person, when do you say, okay, we've got everything we need for this case and it's time to take it down? The outlaw case lasted for 2 years.
Right. And during those 2 years, you went through a lot. There's many things I enjoy about your book, but the one message that I really got, and I hate to use this word, it's such a cliche word, but your vulnerability. You were vulnerable. You tell us about the many struggles that you went through during that first case, the lessons that you learned. Those struggles were both personal to you and marital struggles. You've already mentioned your wife, Kara. I don't know where you want to start in telling us about this outlaw motorcycle club case, but I hope that you'll include as part of that a little bit about your wife because I know when you started this case, It was at a time when you had just gotten transferred to Texas and also were buying a house and had just gotten married to the love of your life.
Yes. I think when I started the Outlaw case, let me think, somewhere around like 2005, both of our daughters had been born, but our second daughter was a newborn. I got one daughter that was born in '02 and then one in '04. All in all, brand new family, brand new home for us. And for listeners that don't know, it's rare to find undercovers in the FBI that are listed full time, at least in my experience, especially all the time. Our mutual friend, Jack Garcia, is an anomaly. He was in New York City. They pretty much had him just doing nothing but undercover. You get to a smaller division, I don't want to say more scrutiny, but bottom line is I'm still a case agent first. If I'm gone from my squad, that means there's a supervisor looking at an empty desk on his squad or her squad. They don't like that. They want big hitters. You want to be doing that. It's still a little broken in the FBI where your squad and your home division doesn't get credit for you doing undercovers in other divisions. So there's always a little bit of a battle there. So I'm still making my name as a case agent, building cases, picking up multiple collateral duties because I like to do more than one thing, and then starting to get known in the undercover community.
All right, we're going to backtrack a little bit because you said you like to do more than one thing. You were over assigned before you took this undercover role. We're going to include in this the fact that you are a husband and a father with a newborn baby at home. We're going to include that as far as your assignments, but you're also a case agent. You're also a firearms instructor.
Yes, ma'am.
If you're not teaching, you're doing role playing at the undercover school.
Yes.
And there's something else there.
I was SWAT. I was a tactical instructor. I led all the firearms and tactical training in the McAllen resident agency and for Brownsville. Because, I mean, San Antonio was like apples and oranges to a lot of divisions. You got a resident agency, but it's 3 hours and 45 minutes away. It has its own ASAC in it. That assistant special agent in charge, the ASAC, covered the Rio Grande Valley. It covered Brownsville, Laredo, and McAllen. So you're kind of like a mini division within a division. Yeah, I led all the tactical and firearms training. I was on SWAT. I ran the firearms for SWAT. I was the principal relief supervisor. And for those that are listening that don't know, that just means that you can become a relief supervisor and be in the program. But if you're the principal, that means you're the number one. So if the boss is gone, you're the one that's going to be running the squad. And it happened a lot during those years. When I teach, I got the PowerPoint up with my bullet points. And then the next line is, oh, yes, and I had a family.
The reason I want to put that out there before we start the case review is because it's going to become very important as we talk about what happened to you working this case. So let's get started. Where do you want to start on the outlaw motorcycle case review?
The best way to start it for me mentally talking about it is at the time I was already the primary undercover on another case in Oklahoma. So like just consider every weekend or every other weekend, I was heading up to somewhere in Oklahoma doing an undercover for a case team there. Then I'd come back and do all the other things that we were talking about, running cases, being a training agent. McAllen would get a lot of brand new agents and you become a training agent. So I'm just like doing what I did, a cop or what was done to me. And that's just basically being a field training officer. I just attach them to my hip and we'll run the case together kind of thing. So I was doing that undercover. Once you get into the undercover program, there's all kinds of ways to find casework, but let's be transparent because that's the only way I know how to be. I'm a white guy with no foreign language. So I didn't jump off the pages for a lot of undercovers. So what I started doing is I just started calling every 2 weeks to the undercover unit back then. It's changed names, but it's the same thing essentially. And I'd be like, hey, you guys got any work for a country guy with no foreign language skills? And they'd be like, hey, big country, how's it going? 2 weeks later, I'd call them back because I wasn't really getting any play in my division. Nobody knew me. I finally harassed or got the attention of Kevin White was a supervisor back then at the undercover unit. And he called me up and said, hey, I want you to come role play at the undercover school. Once I did that, that's when I started getting noticed. I would have probably preferred you be in a division. You have a really good undercover coordinator. They start bringing you in on stuff. You have a mentor, somebody to help you with your paperwork, travel, all the stuff you got to do when you're covert, vouchers and whatnot. Build experience and then go to the school. But that didn't work that way for me. Once I got in the school, because I'm sitting there role playing, right? So if I'm role playing and say you're a candidate, you may not pick up that I'm messing up. or that I'm doing good. But the godfathers and godmothers who have been in the undercover program well before me are watching. I was blessed. Some people saw some things, and I was actually being recruited because that's when I found out from an old buddy, Alex, out of Atlanta. Alex said, "Hey, I just want you to know I didn't just come up here to role play. I'm actually looking," because he was an undercover helping. And he's like, "I'm trying to find somebody for a biker case." So that one fell through. I can't remember exactly if somebody called me for the outlaw case or I saw a canvas, but either way, I ended up, it's like the only time I've really had to do it this way. I flew into Boston, and I'm sure other candidates did too. Kind of like an American Idol audition. I'm sitting at a table and I'm surrounded by FBI, DEA, local task forces. I think ATF was there. I just started getting grilled on my experience. And have you ever been in a biker gang? And I'm like, well, no, but I bounced at gentlemen's clubs, which is an oxymoron because there's no gentlemen in those places. And the Hells Angels used to come to that all the time. I am a biker. I do know the undercover technique. I've done this and this. I guess I passed. It's in the book as well, but there was a great guy. I think you know him too, Barry Loggins, Bo.
No, I don't know him.
Phenomenal man. Did so much for the undercover program. I don't want to say he reminds me of me because he's above me and before me. So I remind myself of him because he sounds more street when he talks. He's a black man, pretty good size, but he's brilliant. I sound like a country bumpkin. Like I told you, I said I look and sound like trash, but on paper I was pretty daggum tight. Barry, at that time, Bo, what we call him, he was the head of the Dallas Stagehand, which is one of our backstopping initiatives. Like I said, I was already doing that undercover in Oklahoma. So I would go and get vehicles and whatnot. It just so happened that I was there one day changing out cars or something. And he pulled me in and he said, "Hey, I just want you to know I just got off the phone with the undercover coordinator of Boston." And I was like, oh, because by this time I'd already flown up there and did the interview. Basically, he put me in a corner. He said, "What do you know about Scott Payne?" He said, "He's a good kid, blah, blah, blah." He said, "What's his experience?" And Barry was doing whatever, saying what Barry told me. He said, "Hey, man, he cornered me." He said, "Would you personally vouch for Scott?" Bo said, "Yeah, I would." And Bo told me that he said yes. And then he followed that with, "Don't F this up."
You got his seal of approval. Do not mess with his recommendations.
Exactly. He said, "I just personally vouch for you, so don't F this up." And I'm like, "Absolutely, sir, no pressure." And then off we went. Different cases, you hope that they've got great intel. Some undercovers happen very quickly, like we talked about with the domestic terrorism stuff. It's, "Hey, how you doing? Good. Yeah, brother, white power. I need a bomb." What? It's happening fast. This was more of what I like to consider as traditional. I'm kind of going in cold, not using a source to introduce me, nothing like that. I lay out my entire story. I get all my legends straight, my backstopping story, make sure everything's in place before I even go up there. And then again, listen to me. As soon as I start talking in a Massachusetts bar, everybody's like, "Where the F are you from?" And you're getting attention just from that. But I will say that the case team was phenomenal. They had a lot of intel on the local outlaw club there, Outlaws Motorcycle Club. And they had several things like, hey, this one guy named Spanky, he loves attention. He loves to be surrounded by big guys, which at that point, I probably ran about 280, 285, 6'4", and it just worked. They had intel on him like that. They had some intel on some other people. For those that don't know the biker culture, they have a meeting every week and it's called church. So you got to go to your church meeting, depending on the club and depending on the chapter. Generally, that just means they're going to discuss business. A lot of times you got to leave your cell phone somewhere else in case they're talking about criminal things, even though a lot of them say they don't do anything criminal. I would probably argue against that from my experiences. Anyway, they're like, hey, they usually go to the strip club called Foxy Lady. I said, hey, do they wear their colors? Which is their cut, their vest. In the biker world, you wear your vest. It's got your colors on it. Top rocker, a bottom rocker, all this stuff that if you're not in the biker community, it probably means nothing to you. They said, no, they can't wear them in the club. And I thought that makes things easier for me because I'm just going to be a tattooed, long-haired dude who likes heavy metal, watching naked women on stage drinking, and they're going to be the same thing. We're just from different places. So what I did, because I knew the industry, because I used to work in it, I went several times just by myself to become known at that bar before any big group of outlaws were there.
Why were you there? What did you tell them about why you were sitting in Massachusetts?
Funny story. Going into the undercover program, I had a pretty limited background because I grew up landscaping in my dad's company and in other things. I was a football player in college and I was a cop. bouncing. I had that. But other than that, I didn't have a lot of business things I could fall back on. So pretty early on in my undercover career, I realized, look, man, I can't be traveling in and out of Massachusetts from Texas for landscaping jobs. That makes no sense. Plus, in Massachusetts, it's cold most of the time. Unless you're doing ice sculpting, maybe. I don't know what kind of landscaping is getting done in the snowy months up there. Oh, maybe you could just do snow cleaning.
Yeah, that's what they usually
Yeah,
do.
the snow blower. I did a lot of research. I went and started talking to friends of friends and friends of family members and business people, and I settled in on being a site survey specialist because that would allow me to travel. There are investors out there, and they don't want to do things by the computer. They want to send somebody they trust to that area if they're looking for property to buy. You can go in there and start looking at what is the land zoned for? Is it mercantile? Is it residential? You go to the county office and pull records. If you want to start talking about red clay versus other types of clay versus other types of dirt, it gets boring pretty quick. What I found is most of the targets would be like, okay, I don't want to hear any more about this. But it gave me a legitimate reason to be in Massachusetts.
Okay, that makes sense.
There's always an argument you don't want to give away tradecraft. And I don't, because I've been undercover when I read a book. And in that book, it had a bunch of things about things that federal undercovers can't do. And I'm thinking, dude, we're still out here doing this. Why are you putting this in a book? So I don't want to do that either. But I can tell you what I didn't want to happen was me show up at that strip club trying to make some kind of connection with the Outlaws. And that be the first time I went in that bar. So what I did is I went to the bar several times by myself when we knew they weren't there. I mean, there might be one in there. I'm not talking to them, I'm not drawing any attention, versus 15 outlaws walking in together after a church meeting.
You'll have to explain church meeting.
In the biker world, a church meeting is their weekly meeting, mandatory. They'll collect their dues. A lot of them talk about criminal activity, just business stuff. Then you leave your cell phones off, things like that. Really just to thwart law enforcement or to keep people from finding out what your inner workings are. And it's not all bad. It's not all nefarious. I am a biker. I'm not saying riding clubs and biker clubs are all criminals by any means. But I went in there and I would order 2 drinks. And if a dance cost $20, I'd pay more. Unfortunately, in that industry, money sells. And if it's a slow shift and you've got money, you can see them all whispering to each other. It's like wildfire ripping through the club. And next thing you know, you got a bunch of people around you. With this accent and telling stories and laughing, that's my skill set. That's what I did. Fast forward to the night we're finally going to try to connect with outlaw members. I'm in the bar on one side and they all come in. But some of the intel that I was originally provided was wrong. They did have their cuts on, their colors, their vests. So you got 13, 15 outlaws walking in and taking the back bar and they're all in their leathers. That changes my approach considerably. What do? Walk up and say, hey, do you fellas ride? And then maybe get beat down and thrown out of a bar. I just did me. I started telling jokes, talking to people at the bar. Next thing you know, you got a group of people laughing, and their intel on Spanky was correct because he was watching it and it was eating him up. He wanted to know what was going on the other side of the bar that was so funny. He wanted to know who I was, and he was the first one to yell out, hey, where the F are you from? And I crack some joke back to him. It goes back and forth a little bit. I think eventually I sent a drink over or something, or he called me over. It didn't take that long. He had invited me to come to the Northeast Regional Meet for the Outlaws, and it was the Lobster Fest, which was held at the Brockton Clubhouse. But specifically, we were trying to get into the Taunton Clubhouse, and we were off to the races.
Now, you said you were a biker.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about that a little bit? Because that was just your own personal thing that you like to do.
I love riding motorcycles. I grew up on motorcycles. I probably don't ride near as much as I used to. I still have a bike. I still go out and ride with friends and stuff. It's just a culture I've always loved. Kind of like a modern day Viking, I say. Because if you watch like the Vikings, the show, pretty much the people still look the same. We just don't ride horses. I'm like, those dudes look a lot like bikers.
All right, cool. So that was legit as far as your legend. You really were somebody who was a motorcycle enthusiast.
Yeah. You don't want to lie and say you know how to ride motorcycles, and the first time you hop on one, you're with a 1%er biker club. It's not a good foundation to start on.
All right. So you go to the Lobster Festival.
Yes, ma'am.
I love lobster, but that's a sidebar.
Hey, listen, I'm not hating. I'm more of a crab and shrimp guy, but yeah, I'm not going to turn down lobster any day. Yeah, I go there. By that time, I was starting to get in with a guy named Scott Town. He was not a patch member, but man, was he super respected by the Outlaws. His story, he told me, is that he could have been a patch member, but in his history, he had also done some things with La Cosa Nostra. We never were able to pinpoint whether it was factual or not. He had said that he had gotten wrapped up in a conspiracy or something, and he was facing 25 to life, and he paid a boatload of money to get out of it. And his story was that he had kind of cleaned up his act. I don't know if he'd had his fourth daughter yet. He might have had her, and I think he'd had her. She was a newborn. Yeah, she was, because she was the same age as my youngest daughter, pretty much. And he said he didn't want to risk going to jail. We'll talk about it later. Later on, when we're doing criminal stuff, I ask him, I'm like, why are you doing this? Don't do it because of me. You got your daughters. I'm going off of what you told me. And he's like, nah, I'm doing it.
As far as they were concerned, were you also a family man?
Very good question. I think it might have been the only undercover. I went in single because I thought it would be better than being married. And I can't remember why I thought that. I will tell you this. It takes a very long time to get rid of the tan line from your wedding band and the calluses that it builds up on your finger and the indention that it leaves in your finger. And I mean, I probably went months without a ring just to get my hand looking normal. I would say probably within the first 3 months or so of being undercover with the Outlaws, I mean, they started bringing in what bikers call sheep. As you can tell, it's degrading. But it's females that are hang-arounds for the club. Most of them are fed drugs, and members can do whatever they want with them. That's the history of sheep. But there were starting to become incidents where there may be some fornicating involved. I can talk my way out of it, but how many times can I do that without it looking suspicious to them? Am I really like them? Am I one of them? So once that happened, I mean, I kind of laughed to myself. I go, well, I guess I'm going to get married. So I went back home and bought a ring that looked very similar to mine with nothing engraved in it on the inside. And I told the Outlaws on my next trip that I had gotten married. And a lot of people are like, well, it doesn't matter. You're over 500 miles away from your home. You can do whatever. And I'm like, nah, you just got to have your whatever you can sell and whatever you can make believable, or you believe it yourself. That's what I told them. I'm like, look, I've had somebody mess around on me before and I was in love and it damn near killed me. So I told myself I'd never do that to somebody else. I'll cheer you guys on all you want, but I'm not getting involved, kind of thing.
One more interruption in the storytelling, but I know throughout your book you talk about your faith. I wanted to know if you also shared that with them. Was that part of it too?
No,
You don't think that they would accept that?
I do remember being in that case and arguing because, I mean, most of your biker clubs, so like for the Outlaws, it's OFFO. It's Outlaws Forever, Forever Outlaws. It's GFOD. God forgives, the Outlaws don't. Being there with them and you're all yelling, you'd be like, Outlaws Forever, Outlaws. Everybody's like, yeah, hell yeah. And you're like, God forgives, the Outlaws don't. You're like, yeah. And then there was this old biker movie where the line was, it's better to be first in hell than second in heaven. And I'm like, wait, what? No. I'm like, what story have you heard where hell's fun?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. But I would joke because I played the Southern thing. Look, I'm not a chalk walking guy, but I'm just saying, all I need is a D-. I just need to get in the gate as long as it's not a failing grade. And I turned it into a joke. But for any case I did, I don't think I ever talked about my faith. On some of that white supremacy stuff, if they had Christian identity beliefs where they twist the Bible, then I could take that, turn it to their beliefs. It was very rare that I threw in my faith. As a matter of fact, one of the things I did to kind of get my mind right and get into character, which I say character like it's acting. I mean, it was me. I'm still the jovial guy cracking the same jokes. It's just I may or may not be married, may or may not have kids, played ball, have an education, be a musician. But you can bet I lift weights and ride motorcycles, and I wear a cross on my necklace. I would take that cross off and put a skull on, and I would change it back out when I got home. That was kind of like my hang it up in the closet, and it'll be there till I'm Scott Calloway again.
Wow. That's really symbolic. Switching the cross for a skull.
Even in the biker world, it wasn't like it was a Christian thing. There wasn't a lot of faith in there at all. It would not have worked in my favor. I'm 99.9% right at 100% sure. Probably would have looked weak to them because you're an outlaw. It's just like F the world.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Just thinking about that just shows how much you have to kind of change yourself. You talk about bringing some of yourself to the undercover role, but separating your faith for someone who that's a good part of their life is, to me, I could see how difficult that might be at times.
It can be. Again, it's not a character. It's me. If you listen to Sergeant Higginbotham, who was the Massachusetts State Trooper on the case, everybody calls him Higgy. If you talk to him, he'll tell you that he saw me changing. I know what my experience was in that 2005 to 2008 period, but he had a different experience because he was looking at it through different eyes. And it was really cool and surreal, humbling to hear his side of it 15 plus years later, because from what he's saying, he could see me changing. He could see that I was becoming more violent. I'm not going to say I didn't have that violence in me. I don't know. Maybe I was, but he was worried. The case team was talking about me patching. Don't get me wrong. I would have loved to have patched. We all got egos, even though we don't admit it or not.
Patching, for those who don't know, is like being made if you were in the mafia.
Absolutely. I was already a hang-around. After being a hang-around, you'd be a probationary member, a probate, and you would have a sponsor, which sometimes is called a dad or whatever. Say I was patching in to the Taunton Outlaws and Joe Doggs, the president, or Clothesline, the enforcer, was my dad. It could be a rough ride. It could be not such a rough ride, but you got to do stupid things. You're on call 24/7. You have to do it for 6 months. And trust me, I would love to have a cut hanging up. But I will say that if you look at the last 30, 40 years of undercover work, there are hundreds of undercovers at the state and local level and the federal level who have patched in biker clubs, and the cases went to crap. The cases, not all of them, but some of them lost themselves. They lost their families. They lost their jobs, whatever. But I looked at it from a different angle, because when they were talking about it, and even the Taunton chapter president, Joe Doggs, he told me, it was on a recording. He's like, Tex, which is my nickname for them, you should patch. You should move up here and patch. You just get a P.O. box and you just stay when you come up here. And I'm like, well, how am I supposed to leave and go do my job across the country when you guys are telling me as a probate I've got to be at the bar serving you guys all weekend long with a fanny pack with the Go Kit in it, which would have condoms and lighters and cigarettes and whatever they may need, and changing oil on a bike at 2 a.m, stuff like that. But what I really was thinking, and I told the case team this, I'm like, look, if I'm a probate, at this point, I was already moving stolen vehicles for them. It started with light stuff like insurance jobs. They would report the vehicle stolen and they would sell it to me at a stolen price. They knew I was at the border of Mexico, and I just used what truthfully happens. The cartels were big on stealing. They loved 4x4 V8 vehicles, trucks and SUVs, and they love Harley Davidsons. I'm not saying anything that can't be found out publicly. So we started light like that, but we were getting to the point to where they were carjacking vehicles and telling me, Tex, we got to get rid of this vehicle. It's got low jack, or it'd be like OnStar today. And I'm like, yeah, we can get rid of it. But what I said is, I'm like, look, if I'm a probate and they're going around the corner to jack somebody, I'm a probationary member. I have to do what they say. If they say, Tex, grab your crap, we're going to go around here and we're going to jack this dude, whether that be a carjacking, home invasion, kill him, whatever, I can't say no. I can't be like, hey, you guys go do that. You bring me the vehicle and I'll get rid of it. You can't do that as a probate. I said, so I'm either getting kicked out, beat down, or both, or who knows what. A lot of times on undercovers, they're doing criminal activity. You've got the predication there. But what sense would it make for me living on the border of Mexico and coming to Massachusetts to buy an 8-ball of cocaine? It makes absolutely no sense unless I'm going to use it that night, and I'm not a user. So you ingratiate, you make connections, you get there. Then we started letting it trickle out that I was actually into criminal activity as well. That's kind of how things cranked off with them. But I didn't want to patch because they believed that I was a high-ranking member of an international theft ring. That's what I'd painted, and that's what I'd laid out. And that's what they believed, because that's what they had seen. And they had done jobs with me, many jobs, and nobody had been locked up because of it.
You are the undercover, but there's a case agent who is out of the Boston division who has designed this case, bringing you in. What is the end game? Why are you there? What is it that you're going to help bring to this investigation?
It's really a great marriage. They can build up stuff. You can have sources. You can buy dope from people. But if you know, or we have predication to believe that they are doing federal level case stuff, large dope shipments, home invasions, carjackings. And even though murder isn't a federal charge for the FBI, unless you're like on federal land, like Indian reservations or wildlife reserves, or in open waters in the sea, or in the air for that matter. I don't know if I knew or we knew what we were going to get. It's kind of like the other cases I talked about with you. You get in there, then you start learning a little bit more about what they're doing. And then you give that to the case team. The case team can go hunt that down. And maybe they've got their feelers out and they may pick up somebody on an arrest who bought dope from said outlaw. And they're providing information. But at one point in the case, they went up on a Title III wiretap, which for the listeners who don't know, it is not like TV. Anytime I see one, and I'm not a person that watches TV and goes, well, this is ridiculous, I can still enjoy the TV show. But when somebody says, I need you to tap that phone right away, I'm like, what?
I know.
We're talking like 70, 80-page affidavits. And if you're the case agent, you're just doing nothing but paperwork. You're hoping that everybody else is getting some stuff on the wire. And then every 15 days, you got to do a report. It's only good for 30 days, and then you got to re-up. It's crazy. But they were doing wiretaps throughout that case. There's murder investigations, stuff like this going on. And I might even, what we call tickle the wire. I might call a bad guy and talk to them a bit just to make sure their phone's working or to get the scoop on something. I think the game became, look, we're building against this particular chapter, the Taunton chapter, and we're also grabbing others. We're meeting people from Florida. We're meeting people from Maine and Philadelphia and New York, wherever, the whole Northeast, all the way out to Detroit. Then it became apparent that they were definitely doing drugs. It didn't take long because I got up to Massachusetts, and it turns out that you could drink whiskey in an all-nude bar, which was the first state I'd ever seen that. Usually if it's an all-nude strip club, it's BYOB. You bring in your own alcohol because it's a licensing thing and it costs too much money and whatever. You go in there, but you couldn't smoke in the bars. So most of the outlaws were smokers. So when they would go out to have a cigarette, I'd go out with them and we'd talk business. You didn't have to talk over loud bar music. It was, let's go get a cigarette. Okay. And then you can hear everything. But the moment that Joe Dogs, I think one of the first things he said when he's like, where are you from? I said, I'm down in McAllen, Texas, near the border. He immediately was like, how much can you get a kilo of cocaine for? And I'm like, well, all right, there's the predication right there. If we were wondering.
But you didn't want to do that right away.
No, because technically, without giving too much away, we can't let dope out on the street. If you let dope go on the street, can you imagine 1 kilo, if we lost it or it went on the street and people OD'd from that or something, that's all liability. You're pushing illegal narcotics out to the street. That's not good. There are other ways to do things, but eventually, well, maybe I should describe how we kind of got in with the criminal activity. I had other undercovers that would come in and they would do cameos on the case to be like a truck driver. So a truck driver comes in because we got to load these stolen vehicles on something. We did one with one undercover truck driver, and then the next one was a guy we both know, Gonzo. He came in and he just stayed for the rest of the case. It just worked. They liked him. He would show up in a truck and we would load up everything, and then he would leave. That's a cameo in my book. It's not a secondary like where I talked about Trucker Paul on other cases I did. I mean, Trucker Paul would come in and, yeah, we would have reportedly stolen stuff on the truck or be buying stolen stuff and putting it on the truck. Paul would stay at my undercover house. We'd go out, hit the clubs, ingratiate with bad guys and gals, go to their houses. That's a secondary undercover. So the truck drivers for the Outlaw case were just doing cameo roles. I know I got Gonzo to go with me for about 30 minutes when we were up in Sturgis to go to the campsite. But other than that, he would kind of for backup. And then along the way, you might have another undercover hop in the truck with Gonzo to help out. They saw that and they're like, okay, it's legit. They think that the stolen stuff's going back to Mexico, but it wasn't. We had built up some trust. Somewhere along the way, I start laying out breadcrumbs. It takes way longer than it's going to take me to explain it. It's nothing you just spew out because it wouldn't look real, I don't think. But eventually I let them know that I did used to be in the dope game and that there was a case at some point and the heat was getting too close. So I backed away. This is all factual stuff. Truckloads of things going to the border. A lot of your Border Patrol and interdiction units at that point in time were looking for money because the dope goes into the states from the cartel and then the money comes back. My argument was if I had a truckload of stolen vehicles, you got a bill of lading and that bill of lading looks legit. I did let them know that I used to be involved in the dope game and I still had contacts. And then eventually, lo and behold, it turns out that a contact needs some help. And Joe Dogs was always, and several of them were always trying to get a better deal on dope. You want a better supplier, a better deal, lower price, good quality, so you can make the most money you can in the Massachusetts area by selling said dope. We ended up doing a drug protection, and they helped guard a shipment being transported from one truck to another. We had 40 kilos of cocaine and 1,000 pounds of weed, which again is 2005 to 2008. So even though weed isn't that big of a deal now, it's pretty much decriminalized. Matter of fact, I don't know of many AUSAs that were biting off on 1,000 pounds of weed case anymore. maybe use it as an enhancement to something else. But we had 1,000 pounds of weed and 40 kilos of coke, which you can imagine is going to involve the Boston SWAT team. I believe that's an enhanced SWAT team, a bigger team. So you're going to have snipers up and everything. Because imagine if we lost 40 kilos of real cocaine and 1,000 pounds of real weed.
Yeah, that's not good. I just did a 2-part episode about Boston police officer corruption with Kevin Constantine and Mike Carrazza, where they did something very similar in Boston, where they had the police officers protect a cocaine and a heroin shipment that was going to go through Boston into Canada. And I know from the book, that's exactly the same scenario. So I guess it worked that time and they decided to do it again.
Well, I'll tell you, that case you're talking about, I'm pretty sure that one involved Jack Garcia.
It absolutely did.
So here's what's crazy. When they take down that case, we had already started putting the wheels in motion about doing a drug protection. To my recollection, it wasn't because we knew that they were doing it on another case. It just lined up with what we were doing, especially with me, with having the truck drivers and moving all this stolen stuff and possible guns and whatever to the border. Because again, that happened a lot. A lot of your Mexican mafia, your Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, all these big criminal organizations, they would trade weapons. They would bring weapons to the cartel and trade it for dope. So there was all this stuff going on. We had already started laying the breadcrumbs, building this case up, building this huge coup de grace, like, hey, man, this is going to be a big lick because we got all the predication. There's no entrapment issues whatsoever. They're begging me for this. The bad guys, they're begging me to be a part of this so they can make a good connection with somebody from the cartel. Are you kidding me? We were laying all that in motion and they took down that case. And that's what was all over the news. Drug protection all over the news. And I'm like, holy shit. All of us are like, it was funny, Jerry, because in my mind, I'm like, do not say drug protection. Do not use those 2 words. So I'd be like, I need you guys to pull security. I'm trying to say anything that doesn't sound like drug protection because it was all over the news.
And trigger what's already out there. Yeah, that was episodes 343 and 344. So if anybody wants to listen and compare the 2 drug protection, not drug protection, but security detail.
Yeah, security. Yeah. I need you guys to be on lookout, and I will pay you accordingly for looking out.
Wow, what a coincidence.
Yeah, it was crazy. I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me, man. That was a crazy time.
How far into your role in the case is all of this going on? It has to be at a point where they really trust you, where they really believe you are who you say you are.
Yes. When we did the drug protection, I had been undercover for a year and a half. So I was probably up there average every 3 weeks and be there for a week kind of thing. But you never knew how long you were going to be there. I always had to get refundable flights because if a truck driver is driving up from, I don't know, the Southeast or from anywhere, just say they're driving from Texas. Well, real stuff happens. What if you get a flat tire? It happens. You're driving a semi truck. What if there's a snowstorm? What if there's a fatality wreck on the highway? You never knew. I'd get to town and we'd try to make sure everything was in place. Joe Dogs was not good at business. He never had collateral. So his idea of business was, I come to town, I hand him a wad of money with no product. He goes around and starts hustling up all the cars that are supposed to be report stolen. I'm like, no, that is not how this works, man. And I'm like, you go get the stuff. You have it in one spot. You have it delivered where we pick the spot. We load the vehicles and the money exchange is right there. So yeah, I'd been under for a year and a half. And then, of course, that's when the big crazy basement situation happened.
All right, before we talk about that, because that's where they are thinking they don't trust you, let's talk about the trust that you've built. And I know one of the things that they talk about in the undercover unit is that you build relationships only to then betray those relationships. I want to talk about the building of the relationship. I mean, you're hanging out with these guys. You talked about Sergeant, was it?
Higginbotham. Everybody calls him Higgy.
You talked about Higgy seeing you change. So do you like these guys? Do you enjoy hanging out with them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you kidding? I loved it because it was my people. Not criminal, but I could show you a picture of the narcotics unit from Greenville County back when I was with my buddies. We'd go to Bike Week and we looked like a bunch of bikers. If I showed you the picture, everybody would be like, there's no way you guys are a bunch of cops. Most people. But not in every case I've done. Deep cover, long term. Did I really make really good friends with people? I would say I have to bond with somebody. That's just me personally. There are people out there that they're great undercovers. And I said this before on your other podcast we did together, but there are men and women out there who have done way more than me and been through more harrowing things than me. And they're not on here for whatever reason. So, but I'm always respectful to my brothers and sisters in blue, first of all, and then especially within the undercover community. For me personally, if I'm going to be somewhere for a year and a half, I mean, I've got a sense of humor. I've got to be able to laugh every now and then. I've got to bond. If I'm not bonding and I'm out there on an island by myself, maybe somebody like Trucker Paul comes in and helps me, and that's my lifeline, something like that. In this case particular, this is my kind of mentality. I mean, Scott Town, he loved to lift weights. So did I. He liked to fight. So did I. He liked to drink. So did I. He liked to ride motorcycles. So did I. His newborn daughter was the same age as my newborn daughter. So instead of being at home holding my baby, I'm holding his. And if anybody's ever had kids or been around kids, that first year of development, they're generally, a lot of kids are making the same noises, moving the same, finding their voice, this, that, and the other. So it was very similar. To this day, I don't think I've ever bonded with anybody like I did with Scott Town.
That's Clothesline?
No, Scott Town was just Big Scotty. Clothesline was Brian De La Vega, and he was probably my second tightest relationship in that 2-year case. And then Joe Dogs would fall back behind that. Scott Town was the guy, again, the first night I bumped into the Outlaws, he came in later and checked me out. There was I say a scene. It's not a scene. It plays in my mind like a scene from a movie, but I remember being at the Foxy Lady and going to the bathroom. If you've been in like common bars, especially in the guys, I don't know about the women's section, but you go in the guys, it's a stand-up urinal. And a lot of them have like an enclosed case at eye level with, the plexiglass. And it's like ads for this act coming next month, this, that, and the other, try this drink, whatever the propaganda may be. And I was in there. The first time I saw Scott Town, that bathroom door kicked open and I'm looking at him in the reflection and I see him eyeballing. And I'm like, oh, okay. I just ran into these guys. I've been talking to them. This could be the check. And I see him actually looking under the stall doors. I can't remember if he pushed them open or not, but he's basically making sure nobody else is in the bathroom. And I'm like, I'm getting ready to get jumped, is what I thought. First split second, I'm like, he's getting ready to jump me. But he actually came up and said, what brings you to Massachusetts? He was checking me out, in my opinion, for sure. That's how I met him in the beginning. But we bonded pretty much right away. So when I went to that Lobster Fest, I was essentially his date, because I didn't know anybody other than maybe Spanky. And I just went in with Scott and I played that self-deprecating humor, even though I was 6'4", 280, whatever. Scott was a big boy too and strong and could fight. He'd walk in and they'd go, hey, everybody's like, hey, Scotty, whatever. And they'd go, hey, who is this? Or who are you? They'd ask me straight, like, who the F are you? And I'd be like, I'm just his bitch today, I guess. I'm like, I'm nobody. I'm his bitch. How's that? But as the time went on, we really bonded. It's scary. If you could look and see how similar we were, like we could finish each other's sentences and it was just crazy. So yeah, you make those bonds. And then I started bonding with De La Vega, which was Clothesline, who was the enforcer. And Dogs, of course. And then there were some other ones, but the tightest by far were Clothesline, and Town was number one. It was funny because you're doing an ops plan, an operations plan for those that don't know. So we say we're planning to do some big deal where we're going to exchange stolen cars for money, or we're going to be going to the Chili Chowder Festival or Chili Chowder if you're in Massachusetts. You can't put it in the ops plan. Hey, is Scott Town going to be there? But the team would ask, hey, is Scott going to be there tonight? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm picking him up at his house. And they'd be like, okay, good. Because they knew that Scott would take a bullet for me and would fight for me. And transparently, Jerry, I would have done the same. Scott Calloway would have done the same for him, which was me. So, yeah, you teach it. You know it through all the source training we get. I mean, you got the horrific stories where somebody doesn't have the training or they're out there on an island by themselves and they get into a relationship with a source. It's a source. It's not your friend, that kind of thing. Same thing in the undercover world, but even at a higher level. I know this stuff, but it doesn't mean you still can't get the feelings.
Yeah, because you just said that Scott Calloway would take a bullet for this dude.
Yep. The bottom line is this for me, even from a tactical standpoint. If the crap's going to hit the fan and it's just me and Scott standing there, I don't know when that cover team's going to make it in. I don't know if a SWAT team's ready. It's me and Scott. So let's go. Let's get out of this situation. We can figure out the rest later.
Let's fast track to the basement because these are dudes that you considered your friends,
Yes, ma'am.
people that you trusted and thought they trusted you.
Yeah. So we upped the ante. We are now getting ready to do this drug protection deal, security. I'd laid everything out, but the assistant United States attorney, Peter Levitt, really good dude. He was like, man, I really would like, if you could, to get on recording the outlaw members talking about this protection in the clubhouse, because that helps with like asset forfeiture or maybe even getting a search warrant, something like that. And again, no entrapment issues there. So, I mean, we're not doing that at all. That's all predicated. And of course, my response as a type A personality is, yeah, I'll go get it. Because, you know, in your head, you're thinking, I'm Scott Payne. I got this. What we found out after the fact was a call had gone up to the national president, the number one outlaw, which at that time was a guy that went by the name Milwaukee Jack, obviously from the Milwaukee area. Milwaukee Jack got the call about this drug deal. He said, has this guy been checked? And the response back to him, from what I was told, was, we've done like 8 jobs with this guy and none of us are in bracelets. In other words, we're not in handcuffs and not arrested. And he said he didn't care. He wanted them to check me. Joe Dogs had told me to come to the clubhouse. And this was the night before we were supposed to do the deal. They were having their church meeting. He said, hey, man, come on over to the clubhouse. I'm like, okay, cool. I go over. He's not responding. I go up and I knock on the door to the clubhouse, which I've been in, I don't know, umpteen times at that point. And he kind of cracks the door with his face kind of shoved in it. Like, hey, man, well, we're still busy. Take OB, which OB was a probate. Take OB, go down to Lombardi, go get something to eat. So we went down the street to Lombardi's, and I'm thinking, man, that's weird. And I even said, I'm like, well, why the hell did you tell me to come if you're not ready? So we go, have a drink, get something to eat at Lombardi's, come back. We're still sitting there waiting. Finally, Joe Dog says, come on in. I come in. I'm doing me. I mean, I'm cracking jokes. They're pouring me a drink. Clothesline's there. Everybody's there because they just had their church meeting. What I couldn't see from my eyes, but what my recording device was picking up that I watched later, because I wasn't facing like where my video recording device was at. It was looking one way, but I was looking the other, in other words. So I would crack my jokes and everybody would laugh like normal. But when I would turn my head and not be looking at them, their laughing would stop and their face would drop like serious. These are things that can be great intelligence if you're picking up what's going on. But I wasn't picking it up because I'd just gotten there and I wasn't seeing it. And maybe I was being naive. Clothesline comes up and he says, hey, Tex, you got a minute? And I said, yeah. Well, like I just told you, I've been in that clubhouse umpteen times. And for those that don't know, especially in their clubhouse, 1%er, if you're not a patch member, you're not allowed to touch the door. So when that door shuts and then the deadbolts are locked and the metal bars laid across the door, you're not a patch member. You don't touch it. You don't touch the phone. But I was respected at that point. As many times as I've been in that clubhouse, there's only one door I'd never gone in. And when he tells me to, if I've got a sec, I'm following him and we go into that door. Well, as I'm following him, Chocolate Scott, sometimes he's called Black Scott, Scott Bulger, another member, drops in behind me. So we go down into, I call it the basement, but it's a northeastern home. It's more like a cellar. I could probably touch the wall on both sides at the same time. I couldn't stand up straight, so I know it was shorter than 6'4", you know? And when we walk down there, I'm getting an oh crap moment. It's dark, and I'm like getting tight, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? It ends up being what they call a false alarm because we get down there, and another member who went by the name Veg was his road name. Veg comes down, and I see Veg giving them the signal of like the fingers across the neck, like, no, I need you out of here kind of thing. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was dope or just a machine gun, because later on search warrants, they found that down there. But I did see rope. Now I'm starting to picking up all kinds of stuff. I'm having that adrenaline dump. You can get it in a shootout. You can get it in a car wreck. But for those who've never had it described to you, when you're having an adrenaline dump or that oh crap moment, you get auditory exclusion. So everything you're listening to slows down. It sounds like you're underwater and it's going, woof, that's what you're hearing. You get time dilation when you're looking. Everything slows down in slow motion and it's going click, click. While you're looking, your eyes are just clicking. You can feel your heart beating. Your hamstrings will get real rubbery and weak. It's not an anxiety attack, but it's an adrenaline dump. It's that fight or flight or freeze. But Veg gets us out, and I hear false alarm. So then now they walk me back up. So I'm like, do I make a run for it at the door? Or do I play this out?
They didn't ask you to do anything when you were down there.
Not yet, because as soon as we walk down, Veg comes running down and is like, no, because he had to hide something or take something out of there that he didn't want me to see. I didn't see plastic on the floor. I was definitely looking for that. Had I seen plastic on the floor, yeah, I would have tried to fight my way out. Would I have done it? I seriously doubt it. It doesn't matter how tough you are, man. It's like 13, 15 outlaws I got to get through just to get outside the door. Now we're up there. I'm still having an oh crap moment. If you listen to the recording, you can hear my voice getting higher, like way higher, because I'm having that adrenaline dump and my throat's tightening up. But what I'm doing is I'm staring at Joe Dogs. I'm staring a burning hole through him because that's the guy who's in charge of the entire clubhouse. He's the president, and he wouldn't look at me. And I'm looking at him, and he wouldn't look at me. And somebody makes a joke about cowboys, and they said something about text, and you can hear me. My voice is like, I'm not really cowboy material. It's all high because I'm having that fight or flight.
Is there a transmitter? Do you have a team outside listening to this?
Yes and no, and I will get to that. It's a great question, and it's a great teaching point. I've been teaching about this since 2008, since the takedown of the case. We walk back down. So now we get back down, and I see their pistols. Chocolate Scott even brandishes his. He shows me. He's standing on the steps to block me from getting out. Clothesline's got me down there, and Clothesline, who's my boy, supposed to be my boy, right? Let's not make it something it's not. He's not Scott Payne's boy. I don't think he would like the FBI agent, but he's Scott Calloway's boy. He tells me that there's a lot of shit going on, these are his words, and it's his job to take care of everybody, being the enforcer. He proceeds to tell me to take all my clothes off. And listen, stripping in a basement at gunpoint isn't a big deal if you're not wired. I mean, yeah, it's embarrassing. It's cold. You're in a basement with two dudes getting naked. I laugh now, but trust me, I was scared crapless, shitless. I don't know another way to say it. So I take off my jacket. I take off my shirt, however many levels I had on because it's freezing up there. I take my boots off and I drop my underwear and jeans down to my ankles. So there I stand naked. He's checking me everywhere. He even checks the skull on my necklace, which I'm sure by now with all the technology, and I'm just like everybody else these days. I just watch TV, you know. But could something fit in there? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not a techie. They check everything. But the problem was I was wired, and I was wired to the hilt. I did have a transmitter, which for those that don't know, that just means that if you're on the other end, you can hear it transmitting. It's not recording. It's like I've got an open line and you're just listening. So I had that, and I had 2 recording devices. I always carried backup because audio video does eat up a lot of, at least then, it ate up a lot of battery life. And you always want to back up just for your case and just for liability, because if I'm only spot checking, a defense attorney could easily argue, well, how do we know what was going on during the other times? Well, because I had another one going that recorded audio kind of thing. And there's been times where all the recording devices crap the bed, and you got to explain that, but it is what it is. I stand there naked, having an adrenaline dump, and then he tells me to write down my full name, my address, and my phone number, which he knew the phone number. And I go to write down Scott Calloway's full name, and I vapor lock because I'm having that adrenaline dump. I'm trying to remember a middle name. Well, hell, I know it. I created it, but I couldn't remember it. This probably took altogether a couple of minutes, but it felt like it was hours. Just like in the tactical world, we always talk about, hey, you bleed on the range so you don't die in the street. We run drill after drill so it becomes instinctive to you. So that's why you see videos of military and law enforcement officers in shootings, and they have no idea how many rounds they shot. They have no idea that they did a magazine exchange. They have no idea that they did that magazine exchange behind effective cover. But because they've trained it so much, they're having the adrenaline dump, but they're doing what they've trained to be instinctive. The way you do that in the undercover world most of the time is by what ifs or by role playing at the school. I didn't know it until I watched the recording back, but I did a distraction technique because I can't remember the middle name. I had no idea I said this, but I said, and what else do you need? My name and what else? Jerry, I had no idea I said that till I watched it in a recording. And I went, holy shit, I'm buying time for myself is what I'm doing because I couldn't remember my name. So while they're yelling up to a probate, what do you need for that website? I've got some actionable intelligence here. I'm doing active listening. I'm hearing they're going to run me on. Back then, there was a popular website called who'sarat.com. So anybody that would find information on narcs or undercovers, they would post it on there. And I knew they were going to probably Google search me and stuff like that. And then I'm going through my mind like a Rolodex. I'm going, Scott Joseph Calloway. I'm like, nah, Joseph was my middle name for that other alias. What about this? I'm just rolling through it. And then it hits me that my initials were SAC because I thought that was funny because that's usually the head of an FBI division, which I knew I'd never be. So then I went, oh, I'm Scott Andrew. I'm like Scott Andrew Calloway. So I write that down. He checks me. I think he's trying to calm me down because even though I'm talking and he's talking, the look on my face to my friend is, tell me everything's going to be okay. And the look I was getting back, even though he was saying certain things, was like, everything's all right.
Because he trusted you. You were his friend.
I guess. But at that point, what do I know? I just know I'm naked and I know I've got wires. He's looking for them.
And I'm sure you're not going to tell us where they were.
Well, that would be tradecraft.
Yes, it would. But you're still here with us and you're talking today. So obviously they didn't find them.
Here's what happens. I thought we were finished. Then he grabs a clothing item that I took off. And one of the devices was in that clothing item. Jerry, I don't know I'm doing it, but if you listen to the recording, I'm watching this dude take this clothing item and he's kneading it with his fingers. And I'm like, holy shit. As I'm watching him, you hear me go, and I don't even know I do it. And he misses it through what I'd like to say is divine intervention.
There's that faith showing up.
There's the faith. He doesn't find it. And then I go right into joking because it's a defense mechanism. I start laughing. I go, can you give me a damn hug now? And I start talking about business because he had just gotten out of jail pretty recent to that evening. He didn't want to go back to jail anytime soon. And then I go up. You ask about the transmitter. This is what I'll tell you. Back then, in that year era and the equipment that I was personally using, it didn't pick up that far away. If you're on a street that is well known for the Outlaws clubhouse and several of them live there, who knows who's watching for who? Like you watch the old show, The Wire, you go to the government housing, they had lookouts. It's 50, 50. The cops used to drive the 50 Mustangs and they're giving the shout out to let everybody know the cops are coming. Everybody runs and hides their dope or whatever. Kind of like cutting on the light when cockroaches are everywhere. They disappear. To my knowledge, every time I'd been in that clubhouse, the team really couldn't hear me that well. Everybody asked me. I've been teaching this since 2008, and I remember it like it was yesterday. They said, man, what would you have done if they found that wire? I said, I had two options. When he grabbed that clothing item, he said, hey, you got anything in here I don't want to see, like some naked pictures of my old lady? And he kind of giggles. But again, because I'm in that adrenaline dump, if you heard my laugh, Jerry, you would know that's not my baseline. You would know. He's like, I'm not going to find anything in here like some naked pictures of my old lady, right? And I go, it's not good. It's a bad day.
Oh, I'm sorry to laugh, but I'm picturing that.
No, I laugh now. I had two responses for Clothesline because he made that joke about finding naked pictures. In my head, my first response probably would have been if he found something and said, what is this? I probably would have said, I don't know, some naked pictures of the old lady just to buy some time, hopefully. But I only had one other response other than that one, Jerry. And I remember it, like I said, just like it was yesterday. I was going to say, the gig is up. I'm an undercover FBI agent. I can walk out of here and we can see each other in court, or all hell's getting ready to break loose. But I thought I would have been bluffing because, again, as I told you, I think most of the time I was in there, I don't think the case team could hear me. But that was the only thing I could think to say. When I was doing the book, the literary agents were like, look, you tell this and you're a funny guy, but what were you really feeling like? Oh, I said, I was scared to death, man. I don't know if I was getting ready to die or not. What I found out was that was at the beginning of our shift that night. It was Sergeant Higginbottom and it was Detective Joe Cummings. He was a task force officer out of Brockton Police Department. Those were the two task force officers the whole time on that case. In the beginning of the Outlaw case, we had one case agent. He was a relatively new agent. And I think probably because the case was growing big, they put another case agent on it, which actually happened to be one of my best buddies from the new agents class. We went through together, Timothy Quinn. So it was Tim Quinn, Sergeant Higginbottom, Joe Cummings, and me. That was the case team pretty much for the 2 years. We had Nancy Morelli from DEA attached as well. That night when we started, it was Higgy and Joe. When I did that first interaction with Joe Dogs at the door, it made something on their spidey senses go off. They picked up on something like something's not right. I did not know this at the time. I found all this out at the end of the night when I handed in my recording equipment in an undisclosed location at probably 4 in the damn morning or something to the case team. But because they thought something was weird, they were close enough to listen to the entire thing. So while I'm in the basement being stripped, they have radioed back to Boston to say, look, they've got Scott in a basement and they're stripping him at gunpoint. This is not good. They might be getting ready to find a wire. Everybody that was working that night was now blue lights and siren hauling from Boston proper city down whatever highway it is to get to Taunton, where I'm at. Higgy and Joe, because they're local and state and local cops and had been there on other search warrants, they were familiar with the insides of that clubhouse. They knew how fortified that door was with deadbolts and a metal bar and all this stuff. So their idea was it would be easier to breach around the door than the door. So they were in a minivan. They had suited up with their vests and everything. Their plan was if they heard me yelling for help or they felt like it was the time, they were going to drive the van into the wall. It was a cinder block wall right beside the door to knock down that wall and hopefully cause enough distraction to get me out. I usually joke when I tell that part now because I was in a basement. I said it probably would have killed me. But that was their plan. I didn't know that. There's so many training things there because I can tell you in my 28-year career of law enforcement, I can't think of too many people that wouldn't have pulled the trigger and come in. Not saying that the case is worth more than a life. Absolutely not. But they knew me enough to listen. And even though I was freaking out and I didn't give any help word or anything like that, they were listening and they knew. They could hear I was scared, but they're listening to clothesline as well and they're paying attention and they didn't rush it.
Did you have a code word that you're tapping out? Was there a word, a safe word?
That's a comical side point because it's all the undercovers or even planning an undercover. I always get, what's your code word? And going back to my vice and narcotics days, if you had a physical, like taking off your hat and tapping your head, I swear to you, Jerry, I don't know what it is. You would never take your hat off and tap your head, but you're out there talking and you're doing the bye. Somebody takes their hat off and taps their head by accident. When we think it's the go word and everybody hauls in. So I always tell people, what's your code word? I go, my code word is if I yell help multiple times in a row. Because I'm not going to be like, boy, it sure is hot in the winter here. I say again.
Or pickle, pinochle.
Turkey, you know.
Well, you know what? I just did this case review. I don't know if it's going to air before this or I'm going to post it afterwards. But the guy was supposed to take off his hat if something was going to happen. And they were outside and the wind blew his hat off.
Yeah. Terry Rancorn, who we talked about, and we'll talk about in a minute too, I'm sure. We've done training and we actually went up and we brought some people for some undercover training, but we meshed it with SWAT. So we would do things like that. Like you have the code word and the case agent and the SWAT teams outside. Do they hit or not? And you accidentally say the code word or you never say the code word and all hell's breaking loose. It's good training. They didn't pull the trigger. I passed. But I'll tell you a couple of things that were teaching moments after that at the end of that evening is, number one, my buddy, Tim, who was the case agent, he tells me at the end of the night, he's like, I'm passing in my stuff. And he's like, Scott, when I was coming down that highway with blue lights and sirens on, I felt like I was in there with you. And I looked at him and I said, you weren't. I said, trust me, I was looking for any damn body I could find that was a friendly. I'm like, yeah, you weren't. I'm glad you feel like you were, but you weren't in there with me. The other thing, sometimes I cry when I tell this part when I'm teaching. I had bought my wife what we call a burner phone because you don't want to call your wife's phone from your undercover phone. That's just bad operational security and it can compromise all kinds of stuff. So I bought a phone that didn't come back to nothing. I would call her no matter what time it was when I finished up back then with that case. It could be 7 a.m. It could be 5 a.m. Who knows? But I'd call her and say, hey, I'm done for the evening. I'm going to the hotel. I'm going to grab some sleep. I'll call you later today. Just to let her know. Sometimes she'd say, okay, love you, and go back to sleep. Sometimes she'd talk to me. That night, Jerry, when I called her, I didn't even really get to say anything. As soon as she picked up the phone, she asked me if I was okay. And I said, yeah, why? And she says, I don't know. She had our daughters and she was driving around McAllen doing something, getting something to eat. She said, it's such and such time at night. And she goes, I just got this overwhelming feeling. She said, I pulled over on the side of the road and started praying for you. I mashed it up. It's when I was in the basement getting stripped at gunpoint.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just goosebumps, chills.
Right. Usually when I'm teaching that, it gets really somber at this point. And then I let it sit for a second and then I bring them back with some humor. I said, so what does that tell you? There are people like faith, this, that, and the other. I said, no, that tells you that my signal reached from Massachusetts all the way to the bottom of Texas. I said, I don't need a cell phone. My wife heard me loud and clear.
Oh, wow. We're joking a little bit.
Yes, ma'am.
But at that point, the whole case obviously changed for you. Before that, you were saying how you were having a good time, doing activities that you enjoyed with this group, feeling the relationship, the rapport that you were having with these dudes. And now all of a sudden, they took you down in the basement and made you strip with the thought that if they found anything, you were in deep trouble.
Yeah, who knows? It's not right. I shouldn't have, but I was so emotionally invested. I got pissed. I mean, I was pissed that they did that to me. So after the fact, I go out with Joe Dogs and Scott Town and I start unloading. I'm not too happy or proud about what I said and how I was acting to them, but you could hear the adrenaline coming out. You could hear that I was pissed. And I'm like, who in the F do you think you are to take me down? Because, I mean, literally, if I was who I said I was, Joe Dogs is like, well, man, it's just people are concerned because it's risky. I said, yes, it's risky because it's illegal. You guys are worried about going to jail. I said, if I screw this up, do you know what the cartel does to people? And all I did was tell the truth because I worked the cartel every week when I was a case agent. They chop heads off. They cut fingers off while you're still alive. They put you in a 55-barrel drum of diesel fuel or acid, turn you into human soup. There's all kinds of stuff. But I was pissed. We pulled the deal off. Everything went good. I will say I don't think I slept that night at all. If I did, maybe 30 minutes. Then we pulled the deal off. My boy, Clothesline, who led that whole thing down in the basement, as far as I was concerned, he didn't show up for the deal. And I took that personal, which I shouldn't, because again, I'm Scott Payne. But Scott Calloway got pissed at that.
This is the protection deal that we talked about.
Yes, ma'am. And there were several other undercovers that came in to help with that, kind of cameo kind of thing. It went well. We paid everybody for what they did. Joe Dogs got what he wanted. He wanted a connection to maybe meet, maybe to be able to deal with my cartel contact later on. But Clothesline didn't show up, and that bothered me. I'm like, oh, you got enough brass to take me down and strip me at gunpoint, but you can't show up the next day. Let's fast forward. I didn't come back to like the week after Thanksgiving, I think. And then I didn't come back to like that January or February. But we'd been in contact on the phone. All the Outlaws knew that me and Clothesline had some stuff we had to work out. So let's jump to that February.
Could you actually read? There's 2 paragraphs on page 82 of your book, which I want to mention again, Codename Pale Horse, that I think really show this. If you could start at Clothesline looked beaten down.
Clothesline looked beaten down, a little sad, and he started to slowly explain what had led to our basement encounter. How word had come on down from Outlaws national president Jack Rosga maybe, a.k.a. Milwaukee Jack, to check me out. He said he really didn't want to do it, Clothesline, and felt like shit. He claimed that he pushed back, saying that he and other members had already done a bunch of deals with me and weren't in bracelets. But an order was an order, and he was the chapter's enforcer. That night, after I left the clubhouse, he was so messed up about what had happened, he got trashed out of his mind, and he slept through the entire deal the next day. I was listening, of course, but I was still upset, and my face showed it. Clothesline continued to look somber. Look, man, I know I was born to be an outlaw, and I know I'm either going to die young or I'm going to die in prison. He paused. Even though these guys are my brothers, I really don't have a lot of friends. Friends that I would take a bullet for, and I know would take a bullet for me. My expression softened, and I started thinking, don't you say it. Don't you f***ing say it. Then he said it, and you're one of those guys. So when I called Kara that night to check in on the phones I described earlier, she asked how my day went, and I said, I'm a dick. I'm a dick. I am such a dick. I said in despair, this guy loves me.
Whoa. So the same things, this feeling that you're feeling towards them, that they're your friends, and you're trying to check yourself. Wait a minute. They're Scott Calloway's friends, not Scott Payne's friends, but they're feeling that for you too. And that is messing with your mind.
Yeah, really. The way I said it to her, sometimes it's hard to read it and do it in my actual inflection. But when she said, how was your day? I said, I'm a dick. I go, I am a dick. I'm such a dick. She's like, what's wrong? I go, this guy. And I watched him. He looked like a scalded puppy. He was just beat down. And I'm like, damn it. But throughout my book and throughout the book writing process, it was actually one of my literary agents that pointed it out to me. You got a co-writer. They're like looking at something. They'll go, hey, these, like say you're talking about a white supremacist or you're talking about these outlaws, these stupid idiots. This is what they did. I'd come back and I go, no, you take that out. And they're like, why? And I go, that's still somebody's kid, man. Most of my career, if not all of it, with the exception of pedophiles, when I sit down with somebody that we've arrested, I'll tell them, I'm like, look, I'm not saying I disagree with what you did. I'm not saying you're a bad person. What I'm saying is you're an adult and you made a choice to break the law and you got caught. And here we are. My literary agent coined it as, you refuse to dehumanize people. And I'd never thought about it that way, Jerry, but that's kind of true. It's still even out still teaching active shooter stuff and like your scale of life priority. And if you shoot the bad person who's shooting kids in an active shooter event, you still got to provide help to them. They might not be first on the list because it might be kids or victims that you got to work on first, but you still have to. And as much as we may not like them, you took an oath and that's still somebody's kid. That could be somebody's parent. That could be somebody's brother or sister or spouse. I was ready to be angry. I was ready to be tough Scott to say, you know what, screw you for what you did to me. And then when he laid out why it really happened and how he felt, I felt bad.
Let's talk about some of the things that you're feeling, because in the book, you admit that you're now becoming anxious. You know something's not feeling right. You're having arguments with Kara, your wife, when you get home. When you are home, you're not fulfilling the roles that you should be fulfilling as a husband and as a father. You're messed up.
Yeah, that's a tough one to read and listen to. Even in the process of writing the book, I found out more. I found out things I didn't know because I'm sitting down and talking with her and we're rehashing these bad times. And of course, I have my take. I know what I experienced. She has her own experiences. I volunteered for all this stuff. It's not mandatory to be an undercover. They can't make you be an undercover. They can't make you do an undercover case. It's all voluntary. They can't make you be on the SWAT team. They can't make you run firearms for the division. You are a case agent. Now, that's your responsibility. And I know things have, this is a whole sidebar and maybe another show. Things have changed over the years, the last several years at the FBI, where maybe being a case agent isn't the most important thing. It is at the end of the day. Writing this book, I had to go back and I'm sitting with Kara and I'm talking and I'm like, she was in such a supportive role of me. I go out of town on these crazy undercovers. She's worried to death about me. We've got little babies at home. We got dogs that are getting sick. One got hit by a car. All kinds of stuff is going on.
How much does she know about what you're doing?
I probably shared more than most people would because that's how my family works. Shame on me, whatever. I don't care. Smack me on the back of the hand. That's terrible OPSEC, Scott. My family cell does not work like that. I can be away from home for about 2 weeks tops. We never had a family unit where I could go away for a month and a half. We just don't work like that. I would share with her a lot of stuff. She knew I was on a biker case. She knew if I got in a fight. But what I found out in the writing this book is that I would be exhausted, right? I would come back. You got to remember, I was on another undercover. So let's just say I'm doing 2 undercovers that overlapped for at least a year. I had the majority of the top 10 cases in like a 3-year period. If you looked at our squad for 3 years, I had the majority of the top 10 cases. I had the majority of the top 10 sources. That's not a chest beating, bragging thing. It's just I'm a workaholic. I took the warrior mentality and I applied it to every aspect of my life. Suck it up. Throw a Band-Aid on it. Let's go. My physical health and mental health and my marriage and everything started to deteriorate and I wasn't seeing it. But what I found out writing the book is that I was a ghost. When I would crash with the kids on the couch or something, I was so brain dead and exhausted from SWAT and firearms and tactics and case agent stuff and the job and the undercovers that she couldn't even ask me a simple question about the bills because I'd be like, I don't care. Do whatever. I don't even want to think right now. I just want to veg. And I didn't really realize that until we started writing this book.
Let's talk a little bit about Safeguard.
Yay.
Because I'm sure everybody is asking, who's there to support you? What responsibility does the FBI have to your mental health?
I laugh, but I actually love Safeguard. It was set up for a great reason. It was actually created by Joe Pistone and Steve Bandt, who was a psychologist by trade, but became an FBI agent. They created that unit. It's set up for the mental well-being of the undercover. If you are an active undercover, you manually have to be assessed more than once a year. If you're getting involved in some crappy things, they can tell you, you got to come down here. So like, hey, Scott, we heard that you got stripped in a basement at gunpoint. Is that true? Yep, it's true. Well, you can't go back on the undercover assignment till you come here and get assessed. Okay, so I fly in. Hey, Scott, is it true that you and your wife got in a fight and there was a 911 hang-up call and the police department showed up at your house? Yes, it is. Well, you can't go undercover till you come here. So it's set up for a really good thing, for the mental stability of the undercover and checking and making sure you're okay. So if you go and get assessed, I won't get into the minutia of what is pre-assessment, post and all this stuff. Basically, as you're doing a case, you're getting assessed through it. And if they find things that they don't think you are, you shouldn't continue the case. You'll get a DNR, and DNRs do not recommend, which means you get put on timeout from undercover for a minimum of 6 months, unless that's changed since I retired. But a minimum of 6 months. You might get some counseling and stuff in there. But Safeguard is set up for a great reason. You get a lot of psychological tests you'll take, and then you'll sit down with a clinical psychologist that's been employed by the FBI, or they could be an FBI agent that's decided to go to the unit. And then you will sit down with somebody like me or my peers that would be a senior undercover just to talk about life. How are you being taken care of in your division? Things like that. In other words, you know the old phrase, you can't bullshit a bullshitter? Well, you can't UC a UC. If I'm in there lying and saying all kinds of stupid stuff and like, oh, everything's great, they can usually see through it or ask you the right questions.
Because they've been there.
Yes. Or even if they hadn't been there, they know enough about the undercover program and technique that you're BSing. You're lying.
So you go for this Safeguard meeting and they DNR you.
Yes. Here's what happened. Let's fast forward. The basement comes and goes. I didn't necessarily have any PTSD from that event. Don't get me wrong. It sucked getting stripped at gunpoint. But it turns out that I didn't know I had some PTSD issues from something that happened to me years before when I had my first back surgery, and I went through a lot of complications. The long and short of it is, for about 3 weeks, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was being suffocated. Just picture yourself being held underwater. I don't know anybody that likes that. Let's now get towards the end of this case. We're actually still not the end. We're kicking. We're doing good. We've got a lot of things we're building up. We've traveled with the Outlaws to Sturgis. We've traveled to the Outlaws to Daytona. Well, when I was down in Daytona for the World Run, I actually had a Safeguard assessment in Orlando. And then from there, I hopped in a truck with Gonzo and we went down to Daytona Bike Week. He was there as a backup, which I ended up needing him because my motorcycle broke down. And I called him and he brought me another motorcycle on the side of the road. At that point, I have now met a lot of outlaws and am ingratiated with a lot of outlaws up and down the East Coast. And like I said, all the way out to Detroit. And there's all kinds of criminal activity. But are you going to charge a case RICO? Some AUSAs don't want to bite off on that. Some U.S. attorney's offices don't want to bite off on it, especially if they've got a slam dunk carjacking case or a slam dunk drug conspiracy where you're going to get the same amount of years or more. So I'm in Daytona. I am with a guy who went by the street name Hillbilly, Leslie Bass. Hillbilly was, to my knowledge and what they told me and what he told me, the first skinhead to ever become an outlaw member. He is white supremacist skinhead. At least that's what his history was. And now he was the former Jacksonville chapter president, and he was now the Southeast regional president. And I didn't know that. We're down in Daytona. I ride by the clubhouse just to see, because I'm still waiting on the Taunton guys to get there. So I ride by the clubhouse and I see Hillbilly. I give him the nod and he's like, Tex? So he backs me in right in front of the clubhouse, walks me in through a sea of testosterone and black leather. I get a couple of drinks at the bar to speed that day up. I'll tell you, we ended up out back in the tented area. To my knowledge, only patch members could go. But he brought me back there and he starts talking about there's another outlaw that's extremely pissed and wants to retaliate against the Hells Angels for something. And, it's typical tough guy talk. I'll kill that guy, blah, blah, blah. Hillbilly says something to the effect of, hey, they're expecting you to retaliate now. Wait, look at how long it took me to get that thing, something like do that thing up north. We were pretty sure it was the Outlaws that murdered a Hells Angel president and injured another Hells Angel member while they were riding in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The one that was hurt saw that it was a green truck with Florida plates. Well, during the wiretap and everything, I'm calling and they're like, hey, we got to lay low. We knew that maybe not enough to prove in court, but it was pretty evident that the Outlaws were involved because they were telling me, hey, if you come out here, you need to be strapping. I go, well, if I get there, we'll hook you up with a bulletproof vest, this, that, and the other. And then there was retaliation from the Hells Angels against the Outlaws when we were in Sturgis, probably for that thing right there. So now I'm at a point to where I am with high-ranking members of the Outlaws, well-known, and he ended up becoming the national president after that. The case agent down in Jacksonville division, Dave Brown, we all met at a hotel room that night to debrief. And when I told him the story about what had happened at the clubhouse, he was very ecstatic because he's like, we've got sources and Hillbilly doesn't act like this around any of them. He asked the Boston team, how much more do you guys need and where are you going to take the case? And it was generally, we've pretty much done everything. And he said, how about we coordinate and you don't take down the Boston case yet. Scott, you come down to Florida and patch under Hillbilly if he'll take you. And of course, at that point in time, just that type A personality, I'm like, hell yeah, man, that sounds awesome. Because now I would be patching. But I didn't know that my body was already shot. When I'd done that Safeguard assessment in Orlando, one of the psychological tests was kind of like open-ended sentences. So it might say men are, and you got to finish it. Women are, you got to finish it. My badge and my gun are, you got to finish it. Well, one of them was the last time I relaxed, or the last time I relaxed, and you got to type it in. Jerry, my minor was psychology. 2 more classes, I'd have had a double major. I knew these were red flags, but I couldn't think of a single thing I did to relax at that point. I'd been going at that pace for 3 years, easy. Later on in life, even after all this happened and I got to East Tennessee, I picked up all those collateral duties again and then some. I was on SWAT, I was a tactical instructor, all this stuff, but I learned how to balance it because I realized I love having a full plate, but I had to be able to balance it. I had to be able to take care of myself, to relax, and more importantly, take care of my family and be there for my family. So back to Orlando, I couldn't think of anything. And I remember thinking, what do I do to relax? I'm like, well, I work out every day pretty much. I go, but that's not relaxing. It's not like I'm listening to Yanni. I'm not doing Namaste. I'm throwing weights across the gym. I didn't know what I did. So I made up a story about taking the kids to the beach. I didn't make up the story. I did take them to the beach, but I made it up to say I relaxed because when you take 2 beautiful little girls to the beach and you're on the border of Mexico, daddy's got hawk eyes. You know what I mean? I'm like watching everything. I'm not relaxing. I'm not going to sleep on the beach. It wasn't really relaxing. It was more of a family trip, but I was always beat at the end of the day. And when I went down to Daytona and I was there that week undercover, I'd been out drinking, whatever, 5, 6, 7 in the morning. And I woke up in the hotel room and I'm like, man, I could feel the eggs and whiskey and hear them swishing in my gut. And I'm like, I'm going to do a workout. So I started just doing a room workout, body weight, burpees, body squats, push-ups, sit-ups, whatever, mountain climbers, whatever you want to do. And I came up for air and I couldn't get any. I had a panic attack. I didn't want to call it that then. I felt like I was a wimp for having it. But when I had it, I completely forgot anything about combat breathing. I completely forgot anything about breathing in a paper bag to regulate your oxygen versus carbon dioxide. I was freaking out. But by that time, I'd become a zombie. I mean, I would get on a plane, and by the time I got off of it, I had a sinus infection. That morning, I would travel with my own coffee. I would make the strongest coffee I could possibly make. I drank 2 cups of coffee back to back. I took 3 hydroxy cuts, which were filled with ephedrine, or ephedrine, however you want to pronounce it. I had hit an inhaler, which also jacks you up. I had antihistamines and decongestants in me. What I found later from the doctors I talked to is that was a cocktail for an anxiety attack. First thing in the morning. I have that anxiety attack. While I'm having it, pretty much the door knocks, and it just so happened to be Gonzo. He's a very seasoned undercover at that point. And he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, I don't think so. So we walk out and sit on the deck. I'm like wrapped in a towel. All your pores open, just sweating like crazy. Lips are white, pursed. He says, well, sometimes when you do these long-term undercovers, we get nervous because we're worried about the end of the case. Or we're nervous because they're going to find out who you are. Or you're worried about, he just started laying out this litany of things that you kind of learn through Safeguard. Well, I wasn't thinking about any of that, Jerry. I didn't think. And he says, could it be any of that? And I said, well, now it is, Gonzo. Thanks for putting that all in my damn head. I'm like, I wasn't thinking about it, but I am now. All I did was take about an hour and a half nap, and I got up, and I went back out, had some whiskey, and continued the case. It's not the wisest thing, and I learned from it. When I left Daytona, wheels up to wheels down, I was out cold on the plane till we landed in Houston. That never happens to me. Matter of fact, I don't think it ever happened. From Houston to McAllen, wheels up to wheels down, I was out cold, woken up by the wheels hitting the ground. And I got home and I slept 12 hours. And I remember waking up thinking, man, I haven't slept 12 hours since like the summer after my senior year in high school. I ate a little bit of food and I passed out. Well, around 9 o'clock, Kara's tapping me going, hey, are you going to get up and eat dinner? I'm like, dinner? What time is it? She's like, it's 9 o'clock. I'm like, 9 o'clock? And I'm like, man, why? So I'd eat a little bit of food and I'm like, man, I don't know why I'm sleeping so much. I really screwed it up because there's no way I'm going to, boom, I'm out again. For that whole week, I averaged over 16 hours a day. I was sleeping. The first 2 days, I might have slept close to 20. Here's the thing. I know depression. I know what it feels like. I know being sick, and I know what it feels like. It was neither one of those things. I was that tired. But by that Friday, I took a phone call from a buddy at the time, one of the best undercovers I've ever known, task force officer. He had called me to see if I knew about another biker undercover that was brewing. But he never got to tell me about it because he said, how you doing, country? And I said, not too good. And for about an hour, he talked to me while I walked around my backyard in McAllen. By the time we got off the phone, he had let me kind of convince myself I should call Safeguard. So that's what happened. I called Safeguard and I said, hey, man, I think I'm crashing. They ended up coming down to McAllen and doing like an on-site, interviewing me there. And I got a DNR. I got do not recommend, but this is what I got. Hey, you can continue the case by phone, but we are suggesting no travel. You've been diagnosed as overassigned, but you can travel to the undercover school because you're with your peers. You kind of get mental therapy as well. You're not just running a school to certify new candidates. You're also role playing with your peers. You're recruiting, you're learning. You realize you're not out on an island. There are other people going through the same thing as you. It's really, really helpful mentally, in my opinion. So I finished the case by phone. I told the Outlaws that, because by this time, Scott Town had gotten it okayed through Milwaukee Jack, the national president, that we would create a support club for the Outlaws, and we would be the number one support club for the Outlaws in the Northeast region. And I was going to be the sergeant of arms in that. I helped Scott design the colors, but he never knew I wasn't coming back. So I laid out this story that I was now getting a divorce from my fake wife because we'd had kids together, and I had to relocate her and my kids to El Paso. And after that, I was moving to Massachusetts. So while that was going on, there was a guy that I'd met named Tim Sylvia, not the UFC fighter, but an outlaw who had gotten out of prison. Scott Town introduced me. He immediately starts talking to me about dope. Even while I was in McAllen on phone, because I'm still making recordings, he called me and asked me, basically, he said, hey, you know what kind of business I'm in? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. He's like, I'm into that magic powder, magic dust. And I'm like, okay. He had heard about the drug protection and he wanted cocaine. And he told me if I could get him a price of $18,000 a kilo, he could buy 10 of them right then and there. He also told me that he had about $100,000 or more worth BMW, a Hummer 2, and some other things that he wanted to sell me and report stolen. So I called the case team and I'm like, hey, do you want to line this up? Is it something you want to do? And they said, yeah. So I called and I basically had Gonzo and he had a Cameo Undercover in his passenger seat. So they're up there to pick up the stolen vehicles. I'm literally on the phone in McAllen and I'm calling Tim Sylvia on one phone and I'm calling them on the other phone and going, he's here, and I'm hooking it up. And when they met him, if you watch the recording, I'm actually on it, even though I'm not there, because Gonzo and the other undercover go up to Tim and then Gonzo calls me. He says, hey, let me call Tex. So he's talking to him. He says, hey, Tim wants to talk to you. So I get on the phone with Tim and he's like, hey, man, I want to report the BMW stolen Friday. And I'm like, hey, can you make it Saturday? Because that'll give me 24 or more hours. And by then I know it'll be in Mexico. Then Gonzo asked me how much he's supposed to pay them for me. And I told him, I think it was like $21,000. When I get off the phone and Gonzo and the other undercover go and pay Tim Sylvia, he asked them about the kilo deal. He's like, hey, can you guys get some cocaine? And they said yes. And that's how we ended the case. They ended up doing, I think, one more meet. Maybe, I don't know if it was probably the United States Attorney's Office wanted to make sure they had everything airtight on Tim. And then in August of that year, they went to do a reversal to pick up the stolen vehicles, a stolen vehicle from, I don't know if he was going to give the Hummer 2 right then or not. But anyway, he shows up in the Hummer to get what he thinks is kilos of cocaine. And they do the reversal and the SWAT team takes him down. And that's the end of the case.
All of your quote unquote friends, Joe Dogs and Clothesline and
Big Scott.
Yeah, they get arrested. Do they plea? Is there a trial?
Everybody pled guilty. One kind of a surreal thing is usually when I finish undercovers, I keep that undercover phone on for at least a month afterwards. I mean, hell, you never know if you're going to get threatened. I mean, a lot of times I've had the people that I infiltrated and betrayed drunk dialing me, going, hey, Scott, it's your boy. And I'm listening to the message. I just want you to know I love you. I know you're just doing your job, you know, and I'm like, well, I love you too. No hate. It's just, hey, you got caught and now we got to deal with it. I was actually somewhere in Nevada. We're running an undercover school. And that was the first time that Mark Horton, who you now know, unbelievable, great guy, always had my back and such a good friend and mentor and peer. He was running the UC school and I was down there, but I had that Nextel. I always wanted to be a part of the Takedown and I always wondered why, but now I realize I was DNR'd. They told me that I couldn't travel. I guarantee you they said I couldn't be up there for the Takedown, which is fine, but I had the phone. So picture these undercover school of these long hours with hardly any sleep, especially the first week. Sleep deprivation like a you know what. We do everything that day. I have a few with my peers and stuff, and I make it back to my hotel room. And I get to my hotel room and my phone's chirping. And I'm like, what? I answer it, and it's Scott Town. I can't remember exactly the time. I know there's at least a 3-hour difference, right? From Nevada to Massachusetts. He's calling me to tell me that somebody called him to let him know that Big Tim Tim Sylvia and my 2 truck drivers had been arrested. So he's telling me on the phone, half asleep. You can hear his voice is all groggy. He's like, hey, I just wanted you to know, I just got a call that your boy, he didn't know him as Gonzo, but basically Gonzo and the other guy got arrested with Tim Sylvia. He goes, I don't know what's going on, but I wanted to let you know right away. And I said, well, they do their own side jobs every now and then. I said, I didn't know they were up there. I said, but I'll start finding out what's going on. He said, listen, I'm going to get up and we'll take a shower and I'm going to find out what's going on here and I'll call you back. And I said, okay, cool. And the last words we ever spoke together, he chirped back and said, I love you, brother. And I chirped back and I said, I love you too. And probably about 45 minutes after that, a SWAT team hit his house and we've never spoke again.
Just thinking about that reminds me of in your book where you wrote that you were keeping a diary. Safeguard asked you to keep a diary. And one of the diary entries that you wrote said, I feel like I owe an apology. Who were you owing that apology to? Is this an example where you felt guilty?
Actually, that apology would have been to the case team because I felt like I owed them an apology for getting DNR'd and not being able to finish the case. But again, by that time, I was chest breathing. I didn't realize that I was so stressed all the time. I wasn't breathing through my belly. I was breathing through my chest, which is more shallow, which causes more anxiousness. I found my threshold. I think your threshold changes daily. It's just like your comfort zone in a workout. Sometimes I take off running and I'm like, man, I feel good. And it feels great. And sometimes I take off running and I go, how long have I been running? And I look down and it's only been 3 minutes. And I go, it's going to be a long day. I met my threshold on that one at that point in time. And I needed a break. And that's what I told Safeguard when they asked me. A buddy at the time, way back then, was the counselor. And he said, let's change roles. I want you to pretend I'm you and you're me because we've known each other for at least 10 years at that point. And I said, okay. And granted, I knew all the answers to the questions. I was ready to pass that test and to be able to go back undercover. He said, you're me, I'm you. What would you tell me? And I dropped my head and I said, I would tell you that you need to take a break and you should have taken one a long time ago. Yeah, that diary is interesting too. I found that over the years, your mind sometimes it can play tricks on you. You knew you were scared back then, but by now you're like, however many years later, you're like, yeah, I was scared, but blah, blah, blah. I read those entries and I was like, man, I was really scared. I was terrified because I didn't know what was going on in my body. I'd seen both of my parents suffer depression. I knew it wasn't that, but I'm like, I don't know. Am I having a damn nervous breakdown? What's going on? And I started sitting down with counselors, and one of them was a Christian counselor from a church down there in McAllen. And I told her the whole story. And she said, Scott, the average person would have crashed 1.5 years ago. And I said, thanks. And she said, thanks. That's not a compliment. And I said, but that means I'm better than average. And she said, well, I got my work cut. She said the government screwed me up. But that's it. It's a surreal thing. I just love connecting with people and I'm proud of the cases that I did. But yeah, you build those relationships and at some point you got to betray them if they're breaking the law. If they're not breaking the law, then, there's been plenty of undercovers I did 4 to 6 months or whatever. And you're like, we don't have anything. They're not doing anything that meets any kind of chargeable offense from a United States Attorney's Office. And you just kill the case.
All right, but this particular case, again, Operation Roadkill, for your work, you and the rest of the case team received the Public Service Award from the United States District Attorney of Massachusetts and the Robert Faulkner Memorial Award from the International Outlaw Motorcycle Investigators Association. Kudos to you and the team.
Thank you. That's all sitting behind me on the Hooray for Me wall right now.
I like that.
Which you can't see, but yeah, that was very good. And again, you know this from Jack and other undercovers you talk to. It's not normal for the undercover to get awarded, which is sad. It happened to Jack. It happened to Pistone. It's happened to probably everybody. I was blessed to be surrounded by case teams that actually put me in for the award with them. So that was very nice.
We've been talking a long time, but I just wanted to make sure that people listening go back to the first episode that we did together, which again was episode 289, where I asked you my standard questions of when and why you joined the FBI and what are you doing now and that kind of stuff. We're not going to do that again this particular episode because we're running a little long. But I do want to talk to you just for a little bit about Undercover because you had this burning desire. You talked about calling the Undercover unit every couple of weeks and asking for a role that you might be perfect for. And I wanted to talk to you about why did you want to work undercover? especially knowing now the toll that it took on you personally and your marriage. Thank goodness that was all resolved and you're still together with your wife and your lovely daughters, but it took a toll. Do you still feel the same way about it?
My typical response is a comic one. I'm like, I'm not a smart man. I don't know what it was. In the book, if you look, I kind of go back that first chapter. I think it's like high school undercover or something. I've always been a gift to gab people person. You don't have to be that to be a great undercover. I've seen unbelievable undercovers that are polar opposites of me. They can sit in a quiet room for hours and not say nothing. That's not me. Even in high school, like in the 80s, you had a smoking area. So I could go hang out in the smoking area. Even if I didn't smoke, I could hang out with the potheads. I told the truth on the lie detector, by the way. I could hang out with the jocks. I could hang out with the musicians. And it's not that I was pretending to be them. I just love connecting with people. I knew I would need something to fill that void when I retired, the FBI. I don't care whether you're smart, dumb, rich, poor, tall, fat, skinny, short, any ethnicity. I love it all. And I love going out and meeting people and talking to people. So I found ways to do that, to fill that void. But I don't know, somewhere the undercover bug. Any undercover movie I ever saw, I loved. Then when I became a cop, after 3 years of uniform patrol, I become a vice narcotics investigator. So I start getting that taste. I go to the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy, get certified as an undercover. I can still remember my first crack buy. I mean, heck, I was probably 270. I definitely didn't look like I smoked crack. I'm wearing baggy clothes and I'm scared to death to put a 20 through a window to ask for a crack rock. It just stuck. I mean, I love it.
Well, I know you mentioned you watched movies about Undercover. Could you read from your book the explanation that your friend, our colleague Terry Rankhorn said? That's page 166.
Here it is, page 166. My friend Terry Rankhorn, by the way, I should go ahead and say, he was also an unbelievable undercover coordinator, did a lot of things for the undercover program. He's retired as well now. My friend Terry Rankhorn once described undercover work like playing a game of chess. Terry worked at the FBI for nearly 2 decades, along with his wife, and like me, he was a certified undercover agent and taught at the Bureau's undercover school. This is his words. There's a lot of common misconception about undercovers, that they're used car salesmen, they're slick talkers, all of this, and that's really not the case. They're strategists. They're playing a game of chess, and you have to understand the consequences of pushing your queen out in the middle of the board. He nailed it. He's very smart. I called it like master of puppets. I picture like tennis or something like that. Like, I don't know what you're going to serve my way, but I got to be ready for it and be ready to send it back with something believable.
Having read your book, I want to make sure that everybody understands that what we talked about today is just a portion. Matter of fact, it's probably a quarter of what is in the book. And the rest of the book has even more fascinating insights about Undercover and different things that you went through. So, again, I want to recommend that anyone who really enjoyed this podcast go out and get a copy available now of your book, Code Name Pale Horse: How I Went Undercover to Expose America's Nazis. Normally, I give my guests the last word, and we can still do that today. This might be cheating, but I know that the last word in your book was really amazing. And I thought maybe I would ask you to read that last paragraph in your book. And then after that, if you have any additional words you would like to share with us, we certainly would love to hear them. Can I ask you one more time to read from your book?
The last paragraph is this. I often think of Dr. Martin Luther King's words. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I'm not going to wade into the debate about policing, except to say I'm saddened by how the badge has been tarnished and how law enforcement is no longer seen as a noble profession by many. There are evil people on this planet who want to do evil things to good people. It's been that way pretty much since the dawn of time. That's where we step in. That's why we're needed. That's why I'm proud of the work I've done and why I will continue to seek out that light and love. Pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty cool. Any additional words before we end?
I've turned that block of instruction that's the outlaw case and the 3-year period and the crash and all that. I sum it up at the end by saying I took the warrior mentality and I applied it to every situation in life. Although I believe that mentality is imperative for the line of work that we did and do, it's not the answer for everything in life, like taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, being there for your family. I applied it to everything and it was detrimental. It was the perfect storm and I eventually crashed. I've now turned that block into more of a mental health thing because in law enforcement and the military, we're number one for divorce. We're number one for suicide. We're number one for alcoholism, and you can probably throw in pills and other stuff now. And we're also number one for dying within 5 years after retiring. So I try to take that and push this mental health thing. You need somebody to talk to. I get the stereotypical, you don't want to talk to the psychologist in your department because of loose lips. You're being vulnerable. I think I've said this to you, Jerry. My personal doctor knows everything there is to know about me. The government knew what they needed to know. It didn't mean I lied. It just means that they don't deal too well with certain things. If you need help and you don't want to go to that person in your department, find somebody. And I'll tell you something a pastor of mine said a long time ago. You may have been burned. You may have gone to somebody and you didn't like them and it sucked. But that doesn't mean that they all suck. Your mind is a muscle. You need to take care of it. You maintenance your car. If you don't give your car maintenance, it will break down eventually. And that's the same thing. Don't feel vulnerable. Find somebody. And what my pastor said a long time ago is he'd say, look, how many people in here have had food poisoning? Pretty much every hand goes up in the room. And he says, did you quit eating? And the answer is no. I never ate at Quiznos again because they damn near killed me. But I eat sandwiches still. Find help. And, a lot of the book is on the hate stuff, which we touched on in the other podcast. But just spread love, man. Get out there and come more towards the middle. All this division, in my opinion, if you look at it as good versus evil, and you really look at it and say, is this evil or good, you can break things down pretty easy.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a direct link to the show notes where you'll find photos of Scott Payne, along with case-related images, and a link to where you can purchase his book, Code Name Pale Horse: How I Went Undercover to Expose America's Nazis. There's also a link to his previous time on FBI Retired Case File Review, episode 289, Undercover White Supremacist, where he reviews his undercover role where a mass shooting at a synagogue was averted. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.